What if in the middle of the night you closed your eyes and saw the face of someone who was no longer here, but who seemed so real, so close, that it touched your soul? That's exactly what happened to a soldier marked by the invisible scars of war. He wasn't expecting it, he wasn't prepared, and yet in a simple dream his life began to change. His mother's face appeared before him with indescribable intensity, as if every feature were filled with love, longing, and hope. The question that echoed in his mind ever since was, what did this dream really want to show me? Perhaps you've experienced something similar, a dream that seems more real than reality itself, a memory that emerges to rescue something you thought was lost. This soldier's life was a battlefield of internal battles. On the outside, he wore the uniform of someone who survived the war, but inside, it was as if he were still fighting every day. The memories haunted him. The sounds still echoed in his mind, and the emptiness seemed endless. Perhaps you've felt this too, living one day at a time with the feeling that the pain won't go away, that there's a wound no one can see, but that gnaws at you from within. That's what we'll talk about here. Stay with me until the end, because what you discover now may surprise you. This soldier could no longer find meaning in anything. The nights were long, the days passed in silence, and the weight of loneliness seemed to crush any hope. Until one ordinary dawn, something extraordinary happened. In the world of dreams, where logic seems to vanish, he found what he desired most without even knowing it: his mother's gaze. It was as if, through that illuminated face, a silent message was being conveyed. There were no words, but there was love. There was no explanation, but there was clarity. And when he woke, something inside him was no longer the same. Have you ever experienced this? An unexpected moment that seems to open a ray of light in the midst of darkness? It's as if your heart receives a whisper, a sign that something greater exists, something that can transform even the deepest pain into a new path. For this soldier, his mother's face became more than a memory. It was a calling, a call to life, to hope, to reclaim what he believed was lost forever. The invisible scars of war were still there, but now there was a different spark. Every detail of the dream seemed to carry a hidden meaning, as if it were a code waiting to be deciphered. He didn't have all the answers, but he had something he hadn't felt in a long time, a desire to move forward. And perhaps that's what connects us to this story, because deep down, we all carry silent battles. We all bear scars that cannot be seen. And sometimes, all it takes is a moment, a memory, or a beloved face that appears unexpectedly to awaken the courage to carry on. This is just the first part of this exciting journey. What happened after this dream goes beyond any logical explanation, and you'll realize the power of such an experience can completely transform a person's life. So, get ready, because what comes next may touch your heart deeply. And perhaps it's at this point in the story that I want to open up a space for conversation with you, who are following me now, because every detail of this dream was not only a message to that soldier, but also an invitation for all of us to reflect on our own invisible scars. And this is where I want to ask you, have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever had a dream, a memory, or even an unexpected moment that seemed to change the course of your life? If this topic resonates with you, leave here in the comments what has touched you most so far, because your experience can inspire others who also carry silent pain. Your participation is essential. When you comment, share your feelings, like the video, and subscribe to the channel, it's not just a simple gesture. It's what keeps this message alive and allows it to reach many more people who need to hear something like this. This space only exists because of this exchange, this sense of community we build together. So if something inside you has been touched so far, show that you're with us. Like, subscribe, and keep following, because every time you do, you help spread hope and strengthen a movement of stories that truly transform lives. And while you're reflecting on this, let's go back to this soldier's journey, because what happened after this dream is even more profound and moving. Behind every forced smile, every prolonged silence lay a weight no one around him could see. People saw only the man who had survived the war. The soldier who returned from a battlefield most only knew from the news. But no one imagined the hidden depths of his mind, where the struggle continued night after night. The invisible scars didn't appear on his skin, but manifested themselves in insomnia, in recurring nightmares, in memories that surfaced without warning. It was as if the sound of gunshots and explosions still echoed within his chest, even when everything around him was silent. This was the hidden truth he carried. He seemed whole, but he was broken inside. Each day was a struggle against himself, He left the house, greeted neighbors, tried to adapt to the routine, but deep down, he carried a void that seemed insurmountable. The impact of the war didn't stay on the battlefield. It came with him and lodged itself in every decision, every thought. The constant alert mentality caused small noises to become triggers that took him back to that painful scene. This created a feeling of isolation, because it was difficult to explain to someone who had never experienced anything like it. How could you tell someone that the mere smell of smoke could open a wound that wouldn't heal? His journey after the war was marked by a silent duality. On the outside, the image of resistance. On the inside, the weight of a weary heart. What troubled him most was not just the memory of violence, but the absence of meaning in the present. He wondered what the purpose of surviving was, if all that remained was to drag himself through the days like a soulless body. And that's precisely where the hardest part of invisible scars comes in. They don't scream, they don't bleed, they don't call for help. They simply silence those who bear them, slowly eroding the hope that something might change. In the wee hours of the morning, he would often sit on the edge of his bed staring into the darkness as if searching for some answer. Sleepless nights became routine, and the nightmares, when they came, were so vivid that he would wake with his body drenched in sweat. At these times, his mother's face would appear in confused memories, sometimes a distant smile, sometimes a word of comfort that echoed in his memory, as if it were real. That face was the only fragment of peace that pierced the chaos, and yet for a long time he could not grasp its meaning. The curious thing is that, even broken, he struggled to keep up appearances. His friends believed he was adjusting, that in time everything would return to normal. But there was no such thing as normal after having seen so much. There was an irreversible transformation, a mark on his soul that altered the way he saw the world. He himself felt he was no longer the same man who had left home months earlier. It was as if he had left a part of himself on the battlefield and brought back a fragmented version, trying to fit into a place where he no longer belonged. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this is where the real turning point begins. The weight of these invisible scars wasn't just about pain, but about choices. He was faced with a limit. Either he would sink into the darkness once and for all, or he would find a ray of light that could guide him back. This decision would be shaped not only by what he experienced, but by how he began to interpret the signs that emerged. The dream of his mother's face didn't come out of nowhere. It appeared at the exact moment his mind and heart were asking for an alternative path. It was like a discreet revelation, but powerful enough to open space for a new narrative. Gradually, he began to realize that every painful memory also carried an invitation to transformation. Pain didn't have to be just a burden. It could become fuel for a change in mindset. This realization didn't come all at once, but in fragments, like puzzle pieces slowly falling into place. It was as if the scars were showing him not only what he'd lost, but also what he could still achieve. This shift wasn't immediate, but it began the moment he accepted that he didn't have to fight alone against everything he felt. And before we delve deeper into this journey, I want to invite you to participate symbolically. Comment below. That makes sense to me, because when you write, you not only respond to this story, but you also declare that in some way you understand the weight and strength that lies in invisible scars. This creates a connection between you, this narrative, and everyone who also carries unseen scars. There was a silence inside him that was louder than any explosion he had ever heard in the war, a silence that came not from outside, but from within, as if the soul had been disconnected and life continued only in the body. Every morning was the same, getting up, looking around, and wondering why he should get out of bed. The soldier who once had a clear mission, a reason to keep going, now lived without purpose. He had distanced himself from friends, family, and even himself. It was as if he had ceased to exist, yet he continued to breathe. This emptiness was more painful than any physical wound because it was invisible, incomprehensible, and at the same time, devastating. The little things that once brought joy no longer had meaning. Hot coffee in the morning had lost its flavor. Casual conversation seemed like insignificant noise. Even places that once sparked fond memories were now just faded scenes. He was stuck in an automatic routine, where every gesture seemed to be done on autopilot. This lack of meaning slowly eroded, robbing him of energy, motivation, and even the ability to dream. It was like being alive, but lifeless. The hidden truth is that often the greatest battle is not against what happens outside of us, but against what happens in the silence of our own hearts. The impact of this state of apathy was reflected in everything. He stopped attending social gatherings, ignored invitations, and avoided people who might notice the pain in his eyes. This decision to distance himself was unconscious, but real. It was easier to hide than to try to explain something he couldn't even put into words. The journey that had once seemed clear was now a road without signs, without direction, without a destination. He believed that nothing he did would have any value, and so, the days passed. The same, dragged on, like blank pages in a book no one dared write. Behind the scenes of this colorless life, there was a man struggling to cope with memories that insisted on returning. The war had ended on the calendar, but it was still vivid in his mind. At night, when sleep finally came, he was invaded by nightmares that made him relive battles, losses, and screams of pain. Upon waking, the relief was only temporary, because the emptiness remained. This absence of meaning was the true enemy, more cruel than any adversary on the battlefield. There was no way to fight with weapons against what was inside him. A different kind of strength was needed, a transformation he did not yet understand. And it was precisely at this point, when the darkness seemed complete, that the memory of the dream began to take on greater weight. The face of his mother, which had appeared that morning, constantly returned to his mind, like a silent revelation that insisted on not being ignored. It was as if life were trying to show him that there was something beyond the emptiness, a calling he didn't yet understand, but which was beginning to awaken something forgotten, the desire to feel again. This image became a point of resistance against exhaustion. It was a hidden truth, hidden amidst the pain, that was beginning to reveal itself little by little. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the lack of meaning wasn't just a passing state of discouragement, but the ground where decisions that could have changed everything were born. It was in this space of emptiness that he began to question his own existence, wondering what the impact of staying alive really was. This reflection is harsh but real. Many who experience similar pain know exactly what it's like to look in the mirror and no longer recognize their own image. The mindset becomes a prison, and each negative thought is a shackle that keeps the person paralyzed. But it is precisely at this critical point that something can happen. A sign, a gesture, a memory, anything that breaks this cycle can be the beginning of a new journey. This story shows that even at rock bottom, a spark of transformation can emerge. And sometimes that spark doesn't come from something grand, but from something simple, a face, a memory, a feeling. He was about to discover that life always finds a way to manifest itself even when all seems lost. And this is where I want to open a space for connection with you again. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. Because when you put it into words, you not only identify with the story, but you also take a step toward recognizing that even in the darkest moments, there is always the possibility of finding meaning again. In that silent dawn, when the weight of meaninglessness seemed greater than ever, something happened that would change everything. The soldier fell asleep as he had so often done, exhausted from fighting his own thoughts, but he was led to an unexpected setting, as if he had passed through an invisible portal. Suddenly, the darkness gave way to a soft light, and before him appeared the most familiar face that could exist, his mother's face. There were no words in that encounter, only presence, and that presence spoke louder than any speech. It was as if every feature of that face conveyed love, hope, and a silent message he needed to hear, even without hearing anything. His mother's gaze held a depth indescribable. It wasn't just longing. It wasn't just memory. It was an invitation to life. She said nothing, but her eyes carried a strength that penetrated his defenses, as if they could dissolve the weight of years in seconds. There was tenderness and firmness. There was comfort, and at the same time, a call. He felt as if that image were saying, "You still have something to live for. There is still a purpose waiting for you." This was the hidden truth the dream brought him, not as an explanation, but as a revelation. The scene unfolded in details that the conscious mind might not have been able to create on its own. The soft scent of his mother's perfume, the feeling of being home again, the memory of the hands that had held him so often as a child. Everything was there, intensely present as if it were real. It was a supernatural encounter, not in the sense of frightening, but in the sense of touching something beyond logic. And for a few moments, he was no longer the soldier wounded by war, but simply a son finding peace in his mother's silent embrace. The impact of this dream was so strong that upon waking, he couldn't tell whether he had experienced a memory or a spiritual experience. His heart was pounding, His eyes were watery, and there was a strange but powerful certainty. Something had changed. He couldn't explain it, but he knew that night had marked a new stage in his journey. It was as if life had found a way to tell him that this wasn't the end, that there was much more waiting beyond the pain. That was the moment when hope, however small, began to be reborn within him. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this dream wasn't just an isolated episode. It carried symbols and meanings that stirred his mind on a very intimate level. His mother's face became a mirror of everything he had forgotten: courage, love, the ability to start over. This encounter opened doors to dormant memories and the possibility of seeing his story from a new perspective. It was as if the war had tried to erase his identity, but the dream came to reclaim his essence. From then on, every detail of that face became an internal beacon, illuminating the shadows of a soul tired of walking in darkness. And perhaps that's what makes this story so powerful. The revelation didn't come from outside, but from within, in an invisible dialogue between memory, faith, and the need for change. This experience showed that, even when all seems lost, a sign can emerge capable of awakening the most human within us. It was just the beginning of a transformation he never imagined he'd experience, but which had already begun that morning. And that's why I want to invite you to participate in this reflection. Comment below. That makes sense to me, because when you write, you recognize that you also understand the impact that a simple encounter, real or in a dream, can have on our life journey. When he opened his eyes that morning, there was something different in the air. The room was the same as always, silent and dark, but within him something seemed to have shifted, as if a weight had been slightly shifted. Still, confusion was inevitable. The dream seemed so real that for a few minutes he wasn't sure if he'd experienced a memory, a vision, or an encounter beyond logic. His racing heart, trembling hands, and the sensation of being caught between two worlds, one marked by pain and the other by the possibility of hope, mingled in an experience difficult to translate. It was in that instant that he realized he couldn't go on living the same way. Something had been stirred, and even without understanding what, he knew there was no going back to where he was. It was a paradoxical clarity. He still felt confused, lost, but within this mixture was a breath of certainty. His mother's face, serene and firm, wouldn't leave his mind. The impact wasn't just the image, but what it provoked, a kind of silent shock, as if he'd been called back to life in a non-negotiable way. This revelation didn't come with ready-made answers, but with an unavoidable sense of change. It was as if every detail of the dream was saying, you can no longer hide behind the pain, you can no longer live as if you've given up on everything. This awakening was uncomfortable because it required decisions. Until then, he had survived on autopilot, letting the days pass as if they didn't matter. Now his mindset needed to change, even if it meant facing the ghosts he had been avoiding. This hidden truth was hard to accept. It wasn't enough to simply wait for time to heal. He needed to open himself to conscious transformation, make new choices, take steps that required courage. The dream was like a flame lit in the darkness, small but impossible to ignore. As he got out of bed that morning, he felt every gesture carry a new meaning. Washing his face, looking in the mirror, putting his feet on the floor, everything felt different, because now there was a weight and, at the same time, a lightness. The weight of the responsibility of starting over, and the lightness of realizing there was still a reason to try. It was as if he had been given a second chance, but on the condition that he not waste it. This realization brought a whirlwind of emotions: fear, hope, anxiety, and above all the feeling that he was at a crossroads that would change the direction of his journey. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the immediate impact of the dream was not only an emotional awakening, but also a turning point in how he began to view his own history. He understood that he could no longer rely on the past as an excuse to remain stagnant. The war had left irreversible scars, but the decision to remain trapped by them or transform them into something new depended solely on him. This was the real shock, realizing that life no longer owed him explanations, and that he alone was responsible for choosing between remaining broken or beginning to rebuild. His mother's face, so present in his memory, became a symbol of calling, a reminder that life, despite all the pain, could still be lived with purpose. This mix of clarity and confusion opened the door to a new stage. It wasn't about understanding everything immediately, but about feeling that there was a direction, a compass to follow. He still didn't know how, he didn't know where to begin, but the conviction that something needed to change was already strong enough to shake him out of his inertia. And it's at this point in the story that it becomes impossible not to think about how seemingly simple moments, like a dream, can have an impact profound enough to alter the course of an entire life. So I want you to join me in this reflection. Leave a comment below. That makes sense to me. If at some point you have also experienced something that, even though inexplicable, caused a change within you. In the days following that dream, something began to stir within him, almost imperceptible but real. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't waking up simply to survive the day, but with a different kind of restlessness. The need to do something, to change, to not let himself be consumed by emptiness again. It was at that point that he decided, albeit fearfully, to start talking about his pain. It wasn't a planned decision but an almost natural impulse, as if the silence that had plagued him for so long had finally become unbearable. When he encountered an old friend who always insisted on asking how he was doing, the automatic response gave way to a long pause and a look filled with truth. For the first time, he let out a fragment of what he carried in his heart. This simple yet profound gesture was the beginning of a transformation, not because everything was resolved immediately, but because by breaking the wall of silence, he realized he could share the burden. It was strange, uncomfortable, even painful, but at the same time it brought a breath of relief. The mindset that once said, "You're alone," began to give way to another idea, that asking for help wasn't weakness, but courage. That's how, little by little, he opened up to seeking support. It wasn't easy to trust, especially after so many invisible scars, but each conversation, each attentive listening, was like a brick removed from the wall that isolated him. Gradually, other small changes began to occur. He began writing in a notebook during sleepless nights, putting into words what had previously been just a lump in his throat. He discovered that writing was like looking at his own thoughts from the outside, and it helped him better understand what he was feeling. Some days he wrote short, almost meaningless sentences. Others, entire pages of memories, guilt, and unanswered questions. The notebook became a refuge, a place where the hidden truth of his heart could be revealed without judgment. He also started leaving the house more often, even if only for a few minutes. The simple act of walking the streets, feeling the wind on his face, observing life happening around him had an unexpected impact. He noticed children playing, neighbors talking, people laughing at small things, and this awakened a mixture of nostalgia and a desire to also participate in life again. It was as if every detail was a silent reminder that the world hadn't stopped, and that perhaps there was still room for him there. These moments didn't erase the pain, but they put it into perspective, as if it were possible to live with it without letting it overwhelm him. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because transformation never happens all at once, but in layers. He realized that opening his heart meant facing the backstage of his own story, revisiting painful memories while simultaneously allowing new experiences to enter. It wasn't easy. There were relapses, days when he simply wanted to close himself off again. But each small step represented a conscious decision not to give up. The impact of this was clear. Although he still felt broken in many ways, there was a spark of life that insisted on growing. This spark, fueled by small daily choices, began to grow into a flame. And so, with the slow, awkward pace of someone learning to walk again, he began to realize that the journey didn't have to be lonely, that talking about pain, seeking support, and opening up to new things weren't signs of weakness but of courage. And that's precisely why this part of the story deserves to be remembered, because transformation often isn't revealed in grand feats, but in seemingly small gestures that, in the eyes of those who experience them, are immense. To mark this moment, I invite you to write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too," because, in a way, we all carry our own steps of starting over, and recognizing this is a way of moving forward. Little by little he began to realize that the image of his mother hadn't appeared by chance. It was as if the dream had opened a crack in his mind, reminding him of where he truly came from, of who he was before the war consumed him. His mother's face wasn't just a memory of longing, it was a living symbol of hope, of roots, of strength. This revelation led him to revisit old memories, simple childhood moments that seemed erased by time. He remembered the stories she told before bed, the way she set the table even on difficult days, The hug that always seemed enough to dispel fear. These fragments began to take on new value. They were no longer just memories. They were reminders that there was a solid foundation in his life, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. This reconnection brought about a silent transformation in his mindset. He began to value small gestures like calling family members he hadn't seen in a long time, or revisiting places that had shaped his life. At first it felt strange. After so long away, he felt ashamed, afraid of not being understood, afraid of no longer finding a place in the life he had left behind. But little by little he realized that his family didn't want perfect answers. They didn't expect a healed version of him. They simply wanted his presence. And this simple act of reaching out was able to open doors he thought were closed forever. Family gatherings became an unexpected remedy. He observed the sparkle in the eyes of a brother who saw him smile again, the silent affection of a father who, even without words, conveyed pride, and the genuine joy of nephews who didn't understand the weight of war but knew how to offer something essential: lightness. This return to his roots was like tapping into a source of energy that had always been there, but which he had ignored while battling his shadows alone. This reconnection revealed a hidden truth that had been before him all along. He didn't have to face the burden alone. To the outsider it might seem like a simple step, but for someone who had distanced himself from the world, sitting at the table with his family and laughing at the little things was a momentous feat. It was proof that life hadn't been completely ripped away from him. It was a reminder that there were still bonds capable of sustaining him when his own strength seemed exhausted. This transformation didn't erase the trauma, but it gave him new reasons to keep going. The presence of his family became like a hammock, a place where, even when wounded, he could rest and be welcomed. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic because this reconnection with his roots wasn't just about affection, but also about identity. The dream with his mother had shown him that he wasn't just a soldier scarred by pain. He was a son, a brother, a friend. He was part of a story bigger than the war, a story that began long before and would continue far beyond his scars. It was in this realization that he began to find the strength to rebuild his own narrative. It was no longer just about surviving the past, but about reclaiming everything that gave meaning to the present. That was the real impact, realizing that by returning to his origins, he was reconnecting not only with others, but also with himself. Each conversation with his family, each memory he rediscovered, each gesture of affection was like a brick replaced in his inner structure. This journey of reconnection brought clarity, because it showed that his mother's face wasn't just a detail in a dream, but a constant symbol he could carry as a guide. It was the beacon that reminded him to keep going, even when the shadows tried to take over. And perhaps that's what makes this part of the story so powerful. The reunion with the past wasn't a prison, but a liberation. It was the chance to transform pain into strength and loneliness into a bond. To emphasize this point, I invite you to write in the comments. That makes sense to me because when you put it into words, you recognize that all of us, at some point, need to return to our roots to find the strength to move forward. As he began to connect with his family and rediscover his roots, a new realization emerged almost naturally. He was not alone in his struggle. Conversations with relatives, the glances he exchanged on the street, and the stories he heard from others who had also experienced the war awakened a hidden truth he had previously been afraid to see. Many men like him carried silent wounds, marks unseen on their skin, but which shaped every decision and every gesture. This discovery planted a seed in his mind. What if the pain he tried so hard to hide could somehow serve to heal or inspire others? At first, this idea seemed strange. He had never seen himself as someone capable of offering something more. After all, for a long time he believed he was just a broken survivor. But as he allowed himself to speak, he realized his words had an impact. When, in an unassuming conversation, he told a veteran colleague about the dream of his mother's face, he noticed something different in the man's gaze, a mixture of relief and identification. It was as if, suddenly, his colleague had found a mirror, a confirmation that he was not the only one struggling with invisible ghosts. It was in that moment that he understood. Sharing his story was not a burden, it was a form of liberation, not only for himself, but for those listening. This revelation paved the way for a transformation. He began attending veterans' gatherings, spaces where war memories ceased to be taboo and became real, human conversations. At first he spoke little, afraid of exposing himself too much. But each time he opened up a little more, he realized there was someone in the room with tears in their eyes, someone who found comfort in knowing they were not alone. What had once been shame became courage. The silence that had previously suffocated him transformed into a voice, and that voice began to echo beyond his own pain. The journey to discovering purpose wasn't linear. There were days when the urge to remain silent returned, days when the traumas seemed stronger than hope. But it was precisely during these relapses that he understood something profound. Purpose isn't the absence of pain. It's the decision to give it a different meaning. This mindset propelled him to go further. He began writing articles, sharing stories in small groups, and participating in lectures for young soldiers in training. Every word he spoke was a revelation not only to others, but also to himself. The more he told his story, the more he realized it wasn't just about survival, but about transformation. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this discovery of purpose after the war wasn't limited to helping other veterans. It became a path to reconciliation with his own identity. For a long time, he believed the war had robbed him of any chance to be useful, to leave a positive mark. But when he saw hope reborn in someone's eyes because of a simple phrase of his, he understood he was building something much greater. It was as if each time he recounted his journey, he was rebuilding not only his own life, but also helping to build bridges for those still trapped in the labyrinth of grief. This choice to transform wounds into inspiration had a powerful impact. He no longer saw himself simply as a soldier marked by invisible scars, but as someone capable of making sense of the suffering he experienced. He came to believe that nothing was lost, that even the darkest moments could generate light, if shared with sincerity. And this simple yet profound truth motivated him to keep going. By realizing that his pain could be the key to opening the door of hope in the lives of others, he found what he had been searching for: purpose. And perhaps that's why his story has become so relevant, because it shows that no matter how great the internal battles, there's always a chance to transform pain into strength and silence into voice. To emphasize this point, I invite you to write in the comments, "I'm on this journey too," because assuming that we seek purpose in the midst of pain is, in itself, a step of courage. Overcoming is not a word that appears out of nowhere, like a pretty label placed on pain. Overcoming is built often silently in the midst of long nights, in days that seem meaningless, in small choices that seem insignificant but are ultimately gigantic steps. The soldier who once believed he had lost everything discovered something that changed his way of seeing life. The invisible scars he carried were not signs of weakness, but marks of resilience. Every painful memory, every fragment of memory, every feeling of emptiness could be transformed into something new. This mindset paved the way for understanding that overcoming is not about erasing what happened, but learning to give a different meaning to what was once just pain. We all, in some way, carry invisible scars. They don't appear in photographs. They aren't stamped on our bodies, but they influence our decisions, shape our behavior, and even how we relate to others. These internal marks are, for the most part, silent. No one around us can see them, but those who carry them feel the weight. And just like the soldier, many people believe there is no going back, that life has been shattered and cannot be rebuilt. But the great revelation of this story is that there is always a way back. Even after the toughest battles, life insists on making room for a new beginning, and that space usually begins within us. The hidden truth is that overcoming doesn't mean winning all external battles, but learning to deal with internal battles differently. The real impact of overcoming is not in showing the world that we're fine, but in accepting that there's still a journey to be lived, and that it's worth continuing. The soldier realized this when he realized he didn't need to erase his pain, but rather transform it into strength. This is how he stopped defining himself by trauma and began defining himself by his ability to start over. This decision made all the difference, because it showed that he was no longer just a survivor of war, but someone capable of inspiring others through his own journey. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because the message of overcoming adversity isn't just individual. It becomes universal when we understand that each person, in their own particular story, faces their own battles. For some, the battle is against loneliness, for others against rejection, for many against memories that insist on returning. But in all cases, there's a common thread. There's always the possibility of transformation. There's always a point at which it's possible to decide to look within and realize that, Even in pieces, there's still something of value, and that something can be the starting point for rebuilding. The curious thing is that overcoming obstacles is rarely marked by grand, heroic moments. It happens behind the scenes, in simple choices, almost invisible to outsiders. It's the moment someone decides to get out of bed on a difficult day. It's the courage to respond to a message when the urge was to isolate oneself. It's the moment to take a deep breath and try again. Small gestures that, when added together, become proof that life goes on. The soldier found in this a powerful truth. He didn't need to wait for major events to feel alive again. He just needed to recognize the importance of small steps, because they were what sustained the journey. And if we think about it, we all have these steps available to us. We don't need to wait for something extraordinary to happen to begin transforming our story. What we need is a mindset that allows us to see each day as an opportunity, even when it seems repetitive, even when it hurts. This is the essence of overcoming, not denying the past but consciously choosing the present. The mother's face, in the soldier's dream, represented exactly this, a reminder that love and hope were still alive within him. This symbol became a beacon, reminding him daily that despite the scars, there was life to be lived. The impact of this understanding is immense. When we accept that invisible scars are part of who we are but don't need to dictate our future, we take the first step toward genuine transformation. This is the power of overcoming, redefining, rebuilding, rediscovering. The soldier's journey is just one illustration of a truth that applies to us all. There will always be battles, but there will also always be the chance to live with purpose again. And this purpose is born precisely from the scars that tried to destroy us, but which ended up becoming proof that we are capable of resisting. This is a message that goes beyond one man's story and reaches anyone who, at some point, has felt lost. No matter what your struggle, there is a path that can lead you back. It may not be quick, it may not be easy, but it is possible. Overcoming is built step by step, decision after decision, revelation after revelation. And when we realize this, we understand that we are not just surviving, we are allowing ourselves to live again, to seal this moment, and make this reflection even more real. Comment below. That makes sense to me, because putting it into words is also a way of recognizing that scars can be the starting point for transformation. After exploring every detail of this journey, from the weight of invisible scars to the discovery of a new purpose, it becomes clear that life always finds a way to renew itself. This soldier's story isn't just about pain or war, but about revelations that arise when we least expect them, and completely change our mindset. His mother's face in a dream was the starting point, but what truly transformed his journey was the decision not to let pain be the final word. He realized he could transform memories into strength, isolation into connection, suffering into inspiration. And this is something that can touch each of us, because we all carry, on some level, scars that remind us of what we've endured. The impact of an experience like this is universal. You may never have been in a trench, but you've certainly experienced moments when life seemed meaningless. Perhaps you've felt the weight of misunderstood decisions, unexpected losses, or memories that insist on returning. And it's precisely at this point that the message of this story becomes so powerful. No matter how great the battle, there is always a path to rediscovering hope. This hidden truth, often hidden behind the scenes of our own lives, only reveals itself when we stop to listen to the signs that surround us. The soldier found this sign in his mother's face, but each of us can find it in different places, in a simple gesture, in an unexpected conversation, in a dream that seems more real than reality itself. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because this reflection shouldn't end as just an inspirational story. It's an invitation for you to look within and recognize that your scars don't have to be barriers, but can be doors. Doors that lead to new choices, new connections, new revelations. Transformation begins when we accept that we don't have to carry the weight alone, and when we understand that, even after the most painful falls, there's life to be lived. This mindset can change everything: how you see yourself, how you relate to the past, and how you build the future. That's why I want to open up a space here for something very special. If this story touched your heart in any way, share in the comments what the most significant dream of your life was. It might be a simple dream, it might be a profound one, but sharing it can inspire someone going through exactly what you've faced. Often, one person's courage in opening up about their experience becomes the breath of hope another needs to keep going. And that's the true impact of stories like this. They don't stay confined to those who experienced them. They resonate and touch lives that might never have access to this message otherwise. So, if this narrative found space within you, write it down. I'm on this journey too, because when you put what you feel into words, you create not only a record, but also a bridge between you, this story, and everyone here searching for meaning, strength, and renewal. And it is precisely in this link, this invisible connection, that the power to move forward resides. This is not a farewell. It is simply the continuation of something greater that is still being built, and that can expand far beyond the words you've heard so far. If you've made it this far, it already shows me that this story resonated with you in some way. And that's exactly why I want to extend a very simple invitation. Subscribe to the channel to continue receiving content that can touch your life and spark reflections that make a difference in your daily life. This space only exists because we share experiences that bring us closer, that remind us that no one walks alone. Please also leave a like, as this helps maintain the connection we've created throughout the video. And if you'd like to make a special appearance, leave a comment below. I'm with you until the end. It will be amazing to see who has actually walked with me this far. And if this message resonated with you, there's a video here that complements this topic. Click and stay with me there because our journey still has much more to reveal.